Okay. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who's joined us for the Muslim Wellness Foundation monthly webinar series. My name is Camila Rashad. I'm the founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation. And Muslim Wellness Foundation is a nonprofit organization which seeks to reduce stigma associated with mental illness, addiction, and trauma in the American Muslim community. And the way we go about doing this is through education, dialogue, and training. So one of the most effective tools really in being able to, at the beginning of addressing some of the stigma, especially in the American Muslim community, is being able to really provide a space for us to discuss some of these issues and talk about also solutions and recommendations for how we can improve the health of our community. This specific initiative of Muslim Wellness Foundation actually began, unfortunately, back in February of this year following the Chapel Hill murders. And one of the things that I, along with my Muslim Wellness team, discussed with a number of mental health professionals around the country is really the lack of the ability to connect with one another. So unfortunately, when we experience some of those tragedies that occur, there's the desire to connect with other healers, with other physicians, psychologists, social workers, and we really didn't have the platform in which to do that. So this monthly webinar series, the Healers Collective Forum, developed out of that and became a way for us to talk about some of the salient issues that are occurring, what we want to address, and how we bring information from our separate and different organizations to the community. How's the most effective way for us to begin to share the information that we've been able to develop? So alhamdulillah, each month we have hosted a webinar. You can find those on the Muslim Wellness Foundation YouTube channel, but we've covered sexual abuse in the community, professional boundaries, what is, understanding Islamic psychology and what that's about. So this month we decided, again, with back to school, with trying to connect some of the resources for parents and communities to connect with the Family and Youth Institute, who's recently published just an awesome report around the state of American Muslim youth. And we know, especially in light of current events, particularly with the case of Ahmed Muhammad in Texas, that this is a very pertinent issue that we want to be able to bring to the community. So not just for mental health professionals, but also for parents, for family members, for administrators and teachers to really be able to understand some of the issues that our youth are struggling with, but again, be able to provide recommendations. What are some solutions that we can begin to enact so that we can, again, be able to assess the health of our youngest members of the community. So joining us tonight is the Family and Youth Institute team. Dr. Sameera Ahmed, who's the executive director, Sadiq Patel, the program manager, and Hanan, Hashem, who's the research assistant, all authors on this report, State of American Muslim Youth. So I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves just a little bit. They have a PowerPoint prepared for you. There's also the link on the Facebook event page. For the full report, I would encourage everyone to, in all of your spare time and leisure time and, before you go to bed, read a page or two. It really is jam-packed with so much information that, I think it's important that, on every level, we really understand some of the challenges, the risks, the vulnerabilities, but also how do we promote strength and resilience in the American Muslim community, particularly as it relates to our young people. So I'm going to turn it over first to Dr. Sameera Ahmed, and you can explain a little bit about what you do, your reason for bringing together your team, and how this report came about.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum. So before I begin, I just want to introduce myself and then also give Sadiq and Hanan a chance, and then we'll kind of talk more a little bit about FYI and the work we do and more about the report. So I am the director of the Family Youth Institute, and the work that we've been doing has started out in 2006. And in and the focus that I've been looking at is mainly doing the research aspect and community education and presentations. And then in a second, I'll tell you a little bit more about FYI, but I wanted to give a chance to Sadiq to talk about himself, and then Hanan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Sadiq Patel. I'm the program manager at FYI. I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Ahmed and Hanan on the State of American Muslim Youth research paper. In addition, my role in FYI is really translating research and creating tools such as infographics, videos, and other resources so communities, especially Muslim communities, can understand some of the challenges facing Muslim youth and their families.
Alright, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Hanan Hashem, and I've been a research assistant with FYI for about, I want to say, 3.5 years now. I've been working mostly on the convert study, which is part of the report, and also been presenting research and writing manuscripts. So inshallah you guys will see more from us.
Okay, Dr. Sameera, if you want to go ahead and set up your screen so that we can view the PowerPoint that you've prepared, that'd be great. Okay. And while that's being set up, one of the components really that just in light of recent events with the young man Ahmed, we really wanted to again focus on why this work is so important. And again, I would encourage everyone to go to the Family and Youth Institute's website, the FYI.org, and download that report. I think it's important, even if it's to scheduling a time at the masjid or another local organization to really discuss what those interventions, what the recommendations entail, everyone's role in being able to ensure that we're providing the healthiest environment for our young people. And again, we understand that Islamophobia and racism is something that's very, very pervasive. And so with that in mind, we want to make sure that at every turn, there's what's called risk and protective factors, that we're increasing the protective factors for our young people, because we understand that often as soon as they walk outside of your home, they're going to be confronted with many challenges, and that will take place either in their neighborhood or in their school. So we want to make sure that they're fully prepared to be able to deal with those stressors. And again, the link to that report is actually just posted on the Google Plus event page. So you can go there, but I would also encourage you to go to the FYI website, the FYI.org, and that link will also be posted on the event page. So just take a look at some of the services that are offered on the programs. And again, this is a really amazing resource for the community. And I would encourage everyone to really fully take advantage of the resources that we have available. So I think, Dr. Sameera, you're ready with your PowerPoint. So I'm going to stop talking and let you get started with that.
جزاك الله خير. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Well, جزاك الله خير for first of all inviting us, and we're very excited to share this report as well as discuss a little bit about what's been going on recently. But before we do that, what I'd like to do is give people a basic understanding of what is FYI. So FYI is an independent research and education institute, and the main focus is to really support young people and their families. And the way we do it is to understanding the nuances of issues impacting them, then educating them through different avenues, different modes of different methods of education. Workshops, articles that we send out Monday through Friday, also videos and academic publications. So we're a nonprofit organization, and the real focus is positive development of young people and their families. How can we best strengthen young people? Now, a couple of things that we do, some of you may be familiar with, is in our process of trying to disseminate information we realize we have to take a creative approach, and so we are increasingly trying to disseminate that research into methods that are easily accessible for the community. So some of you may be familiar with the infographic that we recently passed out, and about the risk behaviors of Muslim youth. And the idea is to help, again, educate the community, realize what are the issues out there that we need to take account of, and then also figure out what are the things that we can do to help prevent that. And I want to share quickly with you one of our recent videos, and we plan on releasing more videos as well as infographics to help us as a community understand what are the issues, and then what can we do about it. So here's a video.
With the rise of drugs, marijuana, alcohol, tobacco, and premarital sex among college students, parents must wonder how they can prevent these challenges from happening in the first place. The first step to prevention is understanding the problem. There are many reasons why youth engage in risky behaviors. Teens with low self-esteem are more vulnerable to peer pressure. Youth who do not feel loved by their parents search for it in the wrong places. But can parents really prevent children from engaging in risky behaviors? The answer is yes. Research has shown that parents have the greatest influence over their child, and this is also the relationship families have the most control over. So what does research suggest parents do to prevent these behaviors? 1. Frequently hug, kiss, encourage, and praise your child. This will increase their self-esteem and shows them that they matter to you. 2. Encourage open two-way conversations with your child. Avoid lecturing and discuss their daily ups and downs. This will earn your child's trust and improve their decision-making skills. 3. Carefully monitor your child's activities and whereabouts. Get to know their friends by taking them to and from after-school activities. Also invite their friends' parents to your home. Monitor their online activities, such as websites they visit, and use FaceTime when they're out with their friends. 4. Avoid criticisms, guilting, and comparisons. While parents may have the best intentions, this will only lower their child's self-esteem and ability to make good choices. To provide feedback, give 2 compliments for every 1 criticism. Be specific about the things they do that make you proud. We call this a compliment sandwich. So how can parents learn more about parenting? At the Family and Youth Institute, we specialize in providing parents with practical, research-based parenting techniques. Whether your child is in preschool, middle school, or high school, we have the resources for you. Our resources include interactive parenting workshops, free parenting articles, videos, infographics, and webinars. To learn more about our resources, visit our Facebook page and join our email list.
Oops, sorry. So one of the things that oops, sorry about that. I apologize for that. So one of the things that we realize is when is that the research is important, but part of it is also realizing that that this information is only as helpful as when people are using it. And so we're really trying to get this information out. But one of the important pillars for FYI is realizing that we need to work and collaborate with other organizations and individuals. And for us to realize that our effectiveness is only as effective as those around us are sharing the research and information and education so that we can start making a change and impacting the families around us. So your collaboration is extremely important, and also in terms of not only sharing information but also feedback as to what is important, what are you seeing on the ground for families. So we encourage you to, again, join our email list as well as like us on Facebook and share the resources we do have with people that you know so that everyone can benefit. Now, in terms of the topic of today, I think it's important that we start off by addressing some of the issues that have been happening recently in the media and in the news. Many of us have heard about Ahmed Mohammed, a 14-year-old Sudanese American from Irving, Texas, he had made a plaque at home and brought it to school to show his engineering teacher. Now, for his story and what happened to him afterwards, being handcuffed, taken to juvenile delinquency, all of that for many of us hits a chord. It encapsulates the story of the experience of many of American Muslims, both the positive and negatives, and it really has impacted our psyche. On the one hand, you see the increasing impact of Islamophobia, and it's happening on our nation. Our teachers, our educators, our police are on edge. It's evidenced by the reaction of school officials and the Irving police, and the only thing you can blame it is really due to the stereotypes and internal biases people may have. Now, while you have that on the one hand, on the other hand, you see the outpouring of support by our fellow citizens, including the president and many well-known individuals who are not Muslim. Now, what you find is that many of these individuals are also asserting our rights and place in this country, and that is also significant and shouldn't go unnoticed. So when we think about Ahmed, he went, after receiving the responses that he did, he posted on Twitter how thankful he was for the support he received, and that he didn't expect people who would care as much since he was quote unquote a Muslim boy. Now that says a lot if you think about it. Ahmed is very aware of his religious identity and how that identity, being Muslim, is currently perceived by society, which then in turn resulted in certain expectations of the world around him. Now, what happened in this situation, was the world didn't react based on what he expected. And in fact, this led to a very different outcome. Now, what would happen if society had not reacted the way it did? What if he didn't have the support persons like his sisters creating a Twitter account, or the community who set up the Twitter account to raise awareness? What if the industry didn't, the tech industry didn't take this under them and make this a cause that they rally around? What if this was just one of many incidents of racism and discrimination? Now, things may have turned out differently. And it's this interaction between the individual and the people and environments around them that really impacts their life pathway or the developmental trajectory they have. So for us to really understand American Muslim youth experiences, we really need to take an understanding, try to understand the varying sources of nuances that impact the pathway of young Muslims today. And that's really what we want to focus on today, because there's no one way for people to understand Muslim youth unless you realize that they're not a monolithic group. It is a heterogeneous group with many different factors that need to be considered. And so when we think about Muslim youth, there are a couple major areas that we need to be aware of. One is that we need to understand the individual and the personal characteristics and traits and situations and histories of that person, because that individual then interacts with their social context. The social context, such as what are the different environments they're in, their family, their school network, the community, their neighborhood. Those two factors also impact with this concept called fluidity, which is things that change in time, situations, phases in life. We won't go into that aspect in detail, but really want to focus tonight on what are the individual characteristics that you need to be aware of, either as a youth worker, as a parent, as a teacher, or community activist, and then understand the social context that may impact the experience of American Muslim youth. Now, on the right-hand side, there's a more comprehensive model that really highlights in greater detail both the direct and indirect effects of varying environments, as well as how society and time and culture, how they all play a role in shaping a young person's development. Now, when we think about the individual, there are a couple of different factors we need to be aware of. So when we talk about any young person, we need to realize that there's specific traits, personalities, experiences impact who they are and how they experience the world. Now, we look at Ahmed. He was intelligent. He was able to go into a STEM magnet school, and he was excited about building robots. Well, when this incident happened and the tech industry heard about what happened, they really made it a cause that they rallied for. So you see this protective factor, which is intelligence, which is part of his cognitive abilities, now interacting with the world in a way that serves to protect him and help him. Had he not been intelligent, had he had cognitive impairments, we don't know if the response would have been at the same level. Similarly, we need to acknowledge that race and racial identity also matters. Now, in his case, the fact that he was identified as someone brown and not black is something that for us to consider why. Because for the most part, when we think of individuals of African descent, either originally from Africa, in his case, his father was from Sudan, he can identify with multiple different groups. He can identify with Arab culture as well as African culture. But in reality, what you see is individuals with such backgrounds are often seen by the environment as black. And so in this case, race also is often an issue to consider. And also, and not just in this case, if we think of other cases such as Trayvon Martin's murder, right? The media didn't talk about his intelligence or the fact that he had attended NASA camp. The media bias was clearly present by the images that they showed, the information they shared, the languages they used, and how they compared him to George Zimmerman. And here you see how an individual's race, unfortunately, became a risk factor, something that literally took his life. And so, again, you see how these individual factors impact how the individual experiences the world around them and how they see themselves. Now, again, going back to Ahmed, he identified with being Muslim, and he was not expecting the support that he did because of the fact that he perceived the environment to not positively accept Muslims. And so you see the response being the way it was really altered his image and his view of the world. Similarly, when we think about such factors such as health, whether the young person has a medical illness, which is a risk factor, and that can impact on what they can and can't do. It can impact their academic abilities, if they have a learning disorder, which then in turn impacts their school performance, acceptance by peer. And so you see how these individual factors can really have this domino effect and impact so many different other factors in their environment. And again, similarly with personal history, if a young person has experience of neglect, abuse, these factors are constantly moving. These are all different aspects of the person's personal history, which can have an impact on their developmental outcome and the decisions that they make. Similarly, spirituality, their connection to their faith, their belief system, whether they have a connection or they don't, can serve as a protective factor. If an individual does have a strong belief system and a moral compass, it gives the individual, a young person, certain guidelines, connects them to other individuals, and the absence may result in a lack of clarity and lack of specific guidelines in which may result in them engaging behaviors that can put them at risk. So you see here how all of these different factors can impact the decisions the individual makes, the young person makes, as well as the opportunities that come to him or her, and the pathways that open up. And so what you see, again, this individual personality traits, their health, and all of these different factors, spiritual, cognitive, personal history, identity, these are all factors that impact what they're able or not able to do and how they interact with the world around them. Now I'll turn it over to Hanan to talk about family and the important role of families.
So, to further understand the complexity of the young person, we need to explore the context that they're in, and one of the main contexts is the family. Just like for those of you who just watched the video, just like the video said, research very clearly shows that parents do have the greatest influence on their child. So I want to stress that the family context is not only the relationship between the parent and the child. There's so much more to it. So, for example, there's the family member history. So, understanding the state of the individuals in that person's family. So, does a family member, be it a parent or a sibling, have a mental health illness or a physical illness that's stopping that individual from giving the youth proper physical or emotional support? There's also single-parent households, which is a big thing. Not only does that affect the youth, but also, it's essentially the loss of a second caretaker. So that puts more pressure on, the first parent to raise kids, which is already, not an easy job to do. So those would be risk factors. So protective factors would be having that family, or whether it's the biological parents or parent figures. In a population here that, our communities need to focus on is the convert community, because sometimes, they do come from backgrounds where their families reject them because of their convert status. So how can we, as a Muslim community, help give them that emotional and physical support that they need? So then you have family structure, dynamics, and cohesion. So sometimes you have family members, whether that's between two parents, between the parent and the child, and even siblings, who just simply don't get along. There's no opportunity for bonding, no shared activities within the family. And a quick point on marital conflict and divorce, which unfortunately is something that we're seeing more often. Sometimes the youth end up blaming themselves. When parents are so engrossed in that dysfunctional relationship and, neglect the child, the youth ends up, with this constant need to be loved, which is then never fulfilled. And then you have, family violence, aggression, and something even more subtle, which is emotional abuse. Most emotional abusers don't even know or realize that they're being abusive. And lots of victims and lots of children, they don't like it, but they think that's just the way it is. What am I going to do about it? And they just put up with it. Things like putting the kid down, or not recognizing their abilities, or making fun of the things that they, are not perfect at, or just plain disrespect. It's really, really important to be mindful of family dynamics as well, because because of it, some kids, affects the kid's behavior and how the kid interacts with other people. So because of it, some kids just, might naturally just be more touchy-feely because that's how their family, modeled affection, whereas, others might find that weird. So it's really important, it's crucial to realize that there isn't one right way to have family cohesiveness, but, so just because one kid is more outgoing and another one isn't, there isn't anything necessarily wrong with that, but you should always be mindful of why a kid is acting a certain way. So if the family is, more open, more okay. So the next point is parenting styles and modeling. So you'll find that some parents are trying to find that balance between giving their kids autonomy and then being there as a support and guide, which is obviously they're both important. Kids, they need structure and they need guidance, and without it, it's really hard to tell right from wrong, especially since, living in America, a lot of the norms within the youth are not Islamically appropriate. So, they need help avoiding negative peer influences, and they need age-appropriate rules and consequences. So, if the parent is not doing that, then what can mentors do, what can teachers do to help with modeling and with parenting styles? So, in the case of Ahmed Muhammad, we can see very clearly, that his family was there for him. I just saw a Twitter post on how his dad was giving out pizza to the people who were interviewing him. And so what does that show? You know, how is that affecting Ahmed? You know, like that modeling behavior, he's showing him, you know, to be polite and to be nice and to have that akhlaq that we should have. So yeah, so I wonder, you know, like what would have happened had he not had that support? Would he be where he is today with all of these offers? So degree of acculturation. So for a lot of families, you know, it's a point to be aware of, to realize how are the parents showing the youth what's okay and what's not okay to adopt from the majority culture, and then also how are they reacting to the youth's degree of acculturation themselves. You know, are they okay that their kids are, you know, smoking or, you know, doing whatever it is? Or are they, you know, aggressive and, you know, they're really on the other extreme side? Parents will monitoring. So many families are so stressed trying to make ends meet and keep up with, you know, the house or even, you know, doing, you know, dawah. But sometimes, you know, they fail to guide and monitor their kids. And again, youth, they need structure and they need monitoring. So parents, they really do play the biggest role in forming the personality of the child. So we also need to be mindful of our interactions as well, whether you're a parent or not. You know, how are we modeling relationships with others? What does our degree of acculturation look like, and how is it perceived by the child? You know, how much monitoring do we do when we're in charge of youth? So moving on to the second context is youth, and you know, the peer context. So again, there's so much more than just how the youth is treated by his or her peers. So of course, the types of relationships are important. So, you know, the youth, they're at a vulnerable stage in their life. You know, they watch each other and they learn how to interact with each other by their environment. And of course, Muslim kids are no different. If a kid is constantly rejected by their peers due to, you know, discrimination or any other reasons, which is something that we heard Ahmed talk about, you know, they're more likely to feel isolated, to reject society, and to more, you know, to be able to engage. They're more vulnerable to engage in risky behavior. So one point that I heard Ahmed say in one of his interviews was, after the way he was treated, he felt like all of those things that the kids were calling him. And, you know, he listed, like, terrorist as one, and you can almost hear the anger in his voice. But, again, going back to the, you know, understanding the complexity of all the contexts together, he had that family context to help him, to support him, and also the community. So leisure activities and interests. You know, numerous studies, they show that Muslim youth whose friends engage in risky behavior, or even if the kid perceives their peers engaging, they think that their peers are engaging in risky behaviors, they're more likely to do so themselves. So whether they are or they even think that they are. So, you know, that goes into norms. So what do they talk about? Do they say, are they very casual about, you know, risky behaviors? That also affects the child, the peer. So as members and parents, you know, family members and mentors, so making sure that the kid is engaging in safe, monitored activities that promote healthy development. And then also attitudes. So, I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Is there anything that you would like to add, Dr. Sameera, while I try to figure this out here?
No, I think that what Hanan is talking about is really understanding the importance of peers. And peers can be both positive as well as negative. And for us to really focus on understanding how can we cultivate those positive peer relationships, around young people because of the fact that it is such a powerful relationship. It is a time period where young people want to belong and need to belong, much more than any other time period. This is the time period where they're also trying to figure out who they are in their world, and with peers being such a reflector of who they are and giving feedback, this peer group is extremely important. So when we think about it from a school perspective or a masjid perspective, or even as a parent, we want to figure out what are the things that we can do to cultivate those positive relationships for young people, so that they do feel belong, they do feel accepted, and they use those peer relationships as an opportunity to help build and develop long-term relationships, as well as figure out who they are and what it means to be who they are, as opposed to being dictated by peer pressure.
And also recognizing how important of a protective factor the parent-child relationship plays. Parents who develop a close relationship, cultivate that relationship with their children early on, build their confidence, build their self-esteem, sense of self-worth. Don't make comparisons, don't put down their child. Will develop that close bond with their child, and the idea is that bond is stronger than any other bond they may create with a peer, so that when they are exposed to peers that engage in alcohol use, tobacco use, risky behaviors, that they care more about acceptance by their parents than acceptance from peer groups that engage in risky behaviors. And so that parent-child relationship plays such a critical role in terms of that long-term development of that child, and oftentimes teenagers and young adults care very deeply about what their parents think, especially those that have formed a close relationship with their children. Should we... So I'm going to switch off to school. So this is really interesting because what happened earlier today happened within a school environment. And so one idea I really want to stress is how the intersectionality of our social identities, and we all are composed of multiple social identities: race, gender, religion, socioeconomic status. How they all come together impacts how others view us and our experiences in the world. So with the incident that occurred in Texas, it's really important for us to recognize that Ahmed was not only a Muslim youth, but he was a black Sudanese Muslim youth, and to recognize how there are certain stereotypes associated with first being Muslim, but also by having, a skin color black. And so individuals on the outside may perceive him differently, A, for being Muslim, but then will perceive him with certain stereotypes for also being a black Sudanese youth. And how being both black and Muslim impacted his experience within the school. So while some students may have been applauded for creating something, Ahmed was arrested. And so we have to ask ourselves that individuals that have certain social identities that we would say are not privileged, whether they're darker skinned, whether they're Muslim, female, whether individuals that have certain social identities that are associated with disadvantages, both societal and how other people perceive us, we have to ask ourselves that are those individuals, A, first seen by those social identities, and then second seen as individuals. And so to really be cognizant of that. And so one thing that we constantly reinforce, especially within the school environment, is how one protective factor is positive reinforcement. Students spend 6 hours a day in school, and teachers play such a critical role in developing a child's sense of self and confidence. So while parents play a big role in developing a child's confidence and self-esteem, they spend 6 hours a day in a school, and teachers can either reinforce that or they can negatively reinforce that. So in Ahmed's situation and in other situations of students who may be black, African American, who may be Muslim, we have to ask ourselves, what are the long-term impact of a student who is first seen for who's first seen for the color of his skin or his religion, and then seen as a human being by their educators? How does that perception, 6 hours a day, impact their long-term trajectories? Also we have to ask ourselves, are our teachers building up our young people, especially Muslims? And we have to ask ourselves, are the schools set up for success? What do I mean by that? So we look at the Muslim population, and it's a very heterogeneous group. We have Latino Muslims, we have African American Muslims, we have convert Muslim youth that are Caucasian, African American, Latino, from a whole set of races and ethnicities. We have South Asians, we have immigrant Muslim youth, we have second generation immigrant Muslim youth. It's a very heterogeneous, diverse population. And so we have to ask ourselves that individuals that Muslim youth that are going in schools that are underserved, underprivileged, urban environments, in low-income communities, oftentimes predominantly, African American and Latino populations, oftentimes have a lack of funding, lack of adequate resources, and this creates a lack of organization within the school, and that creates a lack of stability and safety within the school. And research continues to show that poorly organized and operated schools, children are less likely to value their education, don't do as well in academics, are more likely to disengage from school, and then start beginning to become involved in negative peer groups that promote delinquent behaviors, that promote risky behaviors. And so to really be mindful that within our Muslim community, we have a very diverse population, and some of our community members are from lower income households. And so how can we as a community provide protective factors, provide a buffer, provide additional resources, help within the school? What can we do in order to create a better learning environment for Muslim youth and also non-Muslim youth as well? And one thing I do want to stress is within our paper, Dr. Ahmed or Dr. Sameera really focuses on the strength-based approach versus the deficit model. And so within that strength-based approach, we really want to focus on what are the strengths of a child and how can we cultivate those strengths to be able to build areas that they may be lacking in. And so I think that's really important for us to do, inshallah. And within the paper, we have a whole host of methods that you can implement within multiple environments, after-school programs, as parents, as masjid organizers, as youth mentors, as teachers, and how you can implement strength-based models of working with youth. So now we're going to transition, inshallah, to the community. So again, we talk about how all these different factors impact an individual's experience in the world. So maybe the house life might be a little bit challenging. Parents are going through a divorce, and there's a lot of stress on that marital relationship, which then leads to stress on the child's experience within the home. But then the community can step up and provide that additional support. Then the schools can step up and provide that additional support. If teachers know that something's going on at home, that child may need some extra emotional attention. And so really taking this holistic, multi-tier, multi-level approach where we're no longer looking at each individual family as a unit, but as a member of an entire community. Dr. Sameera always says it takes a village, it takes a community to build up a child, to cultivate a child in a healthy manner, and that's very true. And so understanding how important community plays within the development of young people. And so when we talk about communities, I'm going to focus more on faith-based communities, so like a masajid. But oftentimes, this idea of faith-based communities is expanding. And so it could be a local masjid. It could be a Muslim youth or student group. It could be a local Muslim organization, like the Family Youth Institute, like Muslim Wellness. It could, and oftentimes we have increasing number of what we call third spaces. And these are both virtual and physical locations where young people are congregating to socialize, foster creative interactions, to grow spiritually, to provide themselves with things that they aren't able to find in other spaces. And oftentimes the creation of these third spaces is a reaction to the lack of relevancy they're finding within the masajids. Oftentimes you talk about the lack of inclusivity, the judgments. A lot of youth, African American, Latino youth, talk about the racism that they experience within predominantly immigrant congregational communities. The lack of diversity, how programming might be more geared towards one or two ethnic groups, how programming may not take into account the lack of wealth, an individual's low socioeconomic status, where it may be more geared to a middle class audience, upper middle class audience. How masajids may don't provide resources or opportunities for women to participate in leadership roles within masjids, boards, etc. And so, we have organizations, created to address racism. You have Muslim ARC, address mental health related issues like Muslim Wellness, the Family and Youth Institute, the Institute for Muslim Mental Health, to address convert care issues. But in addition to the creation of these third spaces, we also see how individuals are just leaving the masjid altogether. They're leaving engaging with Muslim organizations. They're choosing to remove themselves altogether from any Islamic or religious context associated with Islam or Muslims. And this phenomenon can be due to many factors. I'm sure that people in the audience can come up with a list of 10 just from their own personal experiences. But it's important that as we move forward and start forging these third spaces, as we start recreating our masajids, as we start redefining the roles of our community, to realize that 80% of Muslim youth are not, according to a survey, this is a long ago, but according to an ISTA survey years ago, are not even associated with the masajid community. So understanding that our programming has to be more encompassing to pull in an audience that is not even currently involved. And so to keep that in mind, what are the long-term goals of Islam in America? What are the long-term goals in terms of being able to bring people back into the masjid community, into our communities in any capacity? How can we create things that are relevant to them? And so one last point I want to talk about when we talk about congregational cultures, I'm going to wrap it up, I promise. I know people have questions, is that congregational cultures have a big impact on people. You know how you have an individual identity. When you're alone in a small group setting, you act one way. Maybe you're more introspective. But now when you're with a group of friends, your personality changes. You might be more boisterous, loud. You're telling jokes you wouldn't normally say in a group of 3 or 4 people. And so oftentimes we give up that self-autonomy in order to gain acceptance into that group, in order to fit in. The same thing happens within congregational cultures. They set these normative behaviors and standards, and people will accept those normative behaviors and standards in order to gain acceptance or integration within that community. So to recognize the power of congregational cultures, studies found that congregational cultures played a bigger role in creating behavioral expectations than it did in terms of religious denominations. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the behaviors, the social norms, the inclusivity, the judgmentalness, the looking down on people, the stigmatization, if that is the culture a congregation wants to embody, that the individuals within that congregation will accept that in order to gain integration within that. And so to be very mindful of how we're creating inclusive communities and how we may be stigmatizing or pushing individuals out because they may not meet the social standards of that community.
Sadiq. So kind of to start bringing things together, we've talked about all the different factors that impact youth development and what the outcome is. What we find again is depending on the interaction between the individual, the young person, and the varying different contexts that they're in, the number of protective factors, the number of risk factors they're exposed to, how that interacts together, how it interacts with the young person, how the young person impacts their environment. All of these factors result in numerous potential pathways, which can be illustrated by the pinball machine. Depending, each one of those little knobs refers to a different experience, different situation, different factor that's in a person's environment. Depending on the angle in which it hits, depending on where the placement of the knobs are, the ball is going to go in different direction. And that's kind of a nice analogy to when you think about Muslim youth development. Again, what are those factors? We need to understand those factors. Depending on the placement of those factors, what are the placement of the protective factors and risk factors, you're going to have different developmental outcomes. And so many of you may be familiar with our infographic that really was highlighting the current rates, the rates of Muslim youth risk behavior. Again, the reason for us to really focus on risk behaviors is because these were issues that we were noticing on the ground across the nation, but had no real understanding of what was the prevalence level within the Muslim community. And so as we're doing our research, we're really trying to focus on areas that are will have most greatest impact on the community. So understanding the prevalence will also allow us to then follow up with, okay, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to educate the community? How are we going to build awareness so that parents are aware and can take protective measures and preventative measures? So as a community, we also need to understand what are the other, we talked about earlier, the nuances. Like, for example, one of the research areas that we look into are what are the unique issues and challenges facing the Black Muslim youth. In terms of how are they similar or different to their peers. Again, that's an individual factor. How does the race factor impact their development? Similarly, for convert youth, we have another research team, which Hanan is part of, where we're really investigating the experiences for those young people. So again, try to understand what are the different kind of pinball pegs that are in a young person's life that can impact their developmental trajectory. And as adults, if we are aware of the nuances, then we are then able to develop more appropriate programming to help strengthen young people. And really, FYI is really trying to help support you towards this effort. One of the things that we do have, another resource that we have for the community to really benefit from, is a workshop that goes into a lot of what we talked about in greater detail.
Expecting to learn something very useful and not eventful. How, this mentorship is not only for youth, it really affects everybody. It's getting a better perspective of how people think about it best in place. So I kind of wanted to learn something about that, and I learned that and much more.
One of the big challenges that we face as Muslim youth in America is understanding how different systems impact their development. One of the things we want to bring out in this workshop is giving a holistic picture of the challenges Muslim youth face at home, in their schools, within their communities, and within the greater context of living in America as Muslim youth. One of the other challenges we see is the inability for some of the adult mentors to connect and relate to Muslim youth.
This workshop is really about helping individuals who are working with American schools, be it in schools, be it in the masajids, and as youth workers, or even as parents, to really give them the knowledge to understand what are the issues facing the school, to help them understand what are the challenges that young people that they're working with may face, understand what are the factors that may negatively impact their development, what are the factors that can really help them develop themselves in a positive direction. It really takes those skills and that knowledge and gives that to individuals who are working in these environments principles that then take the community and really think about how can I use this information in the various settings. And then a lot of things we do then is take that information and apply it within the mentoring context. How would you mentor the individual at an individual level, within a one-on-one interaction? How would you use that information within a group context? How do you use that relationship to help promote the development?
A program like this, it could be taught to all the parents, everybody is trying to do a great deal of just knowing basic things like what types of personalities people have, how to talk about sensitive topics like that. That's something a skill a lot of people have developed, and by growing that skill, it really helps expose a lot of problems to deal with those things. It's not very useful.
youth and anyone that wants to understand how to work with the youth and understand how to mentor the youth. I think this is a program that they should take. I heard about it on Facebook, and when I came to it, I had some reservations about it, but after going through it, I see why it is a great program, where you can learn many things, and I think it'll be very beneficial.
In this workshop, we really want to teach those communication skills, how to cultivate a relationship, how to develop effective programming, how to help youth in a way that's meaningful for them. And we really hope that the participants over the course of the last 2 days and 16 hours of this white workshop were able to understand this bigger picture, the bigger issues facing Muslim youth, what factors to consider while working with youth in developing programs, but more importantly, how to work with youth one-on-one in a way that cultivates a strong relationship, but also is meaningful to the youth as well.
Okay. So, just kind of going back. So before we open up for questions, we hope that this presentation was informative. And if you go into the State of American Muslim Youth report that we co-published with ISPU, you'll find a lot more details about specifically what are the different factors, what are the different specific ideas and recommendations we have that you can use at different in the different contexts. But in addition, if you're interested in more details about the studies that we did cite, all of our academic publications are available on our website at www.thefyi.org, especially specific questions about methodology, sample size, etc. But please do use FYI as a resource. Obviously, cite our work appropriately, but really, this is for the community. Our ability to impact the individuals, young people, and their families is only as useful as other people share and use that information. So we do ask for your help to be an ambassador and share our work with as many people as you know, so that we can have an impact and we can help, support, and strengthen young people. In addition, we also have 2 upcoming webinars for those who are interested in learning more. You can sign up onto our email list as well as like us on Facebook in order to get regular updates. The 2 topics are, again, continuing our discussion on risk behaviors in American Muslim youth, and that will be hosted in partnership with ICNA, Young Muslims. And secondly, homework with boys, prevention through preparation. Again, this is a challenge many of us do face because we have to realize there are differences that we need to help work with and adjust our teaching styles and educational style and homework preparation. So we invite you to both of those webinars as well. And I will turn it over to Camila.
Okay. Well, thank you, all 3 of you, really so much for that presentation. I was, trying to take notes and tweet at the same time. I think because some of the points that you highlighted, particularly as it relates to how you can begin to integrate some of the really the great research, that you've been able to uncover as it relates to young people is really so important. And so just a few of the points that I highlighted and marked. One is that we have to be very aware of our, I think, Sadiq, you termed it like congregational culture. What are the expectations when a young person is beginning to become more involved in different masajid or Islamic organizations? And I think, Hanan, you also mentioned this. How are we modeling appropriate behavior as adults? Sometimes we wonder, like, oh, why are the youth behaving this way? We don't understand. What are they doing? But we aren't being very self-reflective, about some of the things that they're actually witnessing the adults in their lives do and kind of how they're behaving. So I thought that was really important. As well as to understand the question that you asked, Sadiq, was what is the long-term impact? If our children are spending 6 hours a day or 7 hours a day in school and they are confronted by an educator who is not very nurturing or supportive of them or treats them negatively because of their race or religion, what is the long-term impact of that exposure to that adult? And I wanted to know if you could expand just, or three of you could expand a little bit about that point, because I think, again, you know, Ahmed Mohammed really is a great example of, you know, a young person who clearly has tremendous family support and community support. So while he understood why people were viewing him in such a negative light, you know, when I watched the clip of the press conference, he was smiling. You know, it was just really amazing to see, you know, his family behind him, to hear how, you know, well he was able to express himself and some of the thoughts he had. So just, you know, kind of expanding a little bit on that point, that, you know, being aware of the long-term impact of that exposure, and then what we can do as, you know, parents and educators and the community members to offer, you know, to be able to buffer some of that negativity.
Sameera?
So, I mean, I think part of what we do need to realize, we do need to have our young people aware of reality, but at the same time, with that reality, try to help them, provide them with opportunities and ideas of how people have buffered, how do you cope with it, and really teaching them the coping skills. Because for us to expect that, you know, now that this situation happened with Ahmed, it's, you know, everything's okay, let's, you know, do kumbaya, that's not going to happen. So it's very important for us to, you know, on the one hand, help them realize that this is real, Islamophobia is real, and it can impact you, and really helping them and learning actually a lot from the Black Lives Matter movement, and helping us realize, okay, this is our reality, there is racism that's being institutionalized, and for us to realize and learn from the experiences of the Black community, because there's so much that we can use and benefit from. So helping them realize reality is one. Second, give them tools and understanding of when these situations happen. For example, looking at Ahmed's situation, these are things that happen that should not have happened. And these are the different ways that you can do to protect yourself. But at the same time, really focusing on the fact that, okay, he was supported, he had his family, he had the community behind him. And also within our communities, having these discussions and having a place where young people can talk about situations and environments. Where they feel bullied, where they don't feel safe. A recent report came out by CARE, I believe, just was stating how about almost 50% of young people indicated that they had experienced somebody in the school, either peer teachers or somebody else, saying something negative about their religion or themselves because of their religion or their ethnic background. Now, what was really interesting was many of the young people didn't share that information with school officials, their parents, because they didn't feel empowered. And that's one thing that we do need to counter, and that's something that we can do as parents as well as community members, learning and helping to support young people to have their voice and express their voice and feel supported that they can make a difference. And I think this example of Ahmed is really wonderful to helping them realize this fact.
I think also just focusing on, in addition to what Sameera mentioned, focus on identity development and cultivation. And so putting a lot of focus on the diversity that exists within our communities, and to spend a lot of time educating immigrant Muslims about African American culture, Latino culture, and the other cultures that exist within our communities as well, and vice versa. But I think that's incredibly important because it builds a child's sense of self, and they develop this schema, this idea that the story they tell themselves about themselves. And so if they grow up feeling being Muslim is something to be proud of, being Black, being Latino, being South Asian, Arab is something to be proud of, that creates an incredible protective factor. And so during those formative years, they grow up feeling pride in terms of being different from the dominant culture that exists within the school environment. And so when they go to school, they're able to discern between incidents of racism or ignorance versus when they do experience it at school, and they grow up in a household where they're taught that they're less than, inferior, you're not good enough, and then they go to school and they're treated differently because they are Black or because they are Muslim. They almost internalize that. It's that same message being reinforced, that I'm not good enough because at home I'm not smart enough, but at school because I'm not a certain religion or a certain race. And so to be very mindful as we're in communities, as we're raising our youth, how that impacts them.
And just to add to both of your points, you know, we can talk to our kids about, you know, what are the possible things that can happen to you, but, you know, it's inevitable that, you know, maybe they do run into a situation where they don't know what to do. So developing those relationships just on the basic level, whether you're a mentor or a parent, gives that youth, you know, a place to go back to and ask questions and say, hey, this happened to me, I don't know what to do, instead of, you know, with the case of the kids in the school, they just think, oh, well, this is just a part of being Muslim in America. You know, I have no power to do anything.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, again, kind of going back to the idea that children and youth are watching adults. You know, how are adults responding to Islamophobia? You know, because adults are also experiencing harassment in the workplace. You know, just recently with the case of Cherie Stanley, the flight attendant, you know, who refused to serve alcohol. And so, you know, thinking about our community's response to that, you know, someone who wanted to adhere to her understanding of Islam and how it impacted her work, our response to that also influences how our children are going to respond. So sometimes there's this idea that we try to act as if we are unaffected by all of these stressors, which is not the case. We're deeply impacted, you know, on a daily basis by these microaggressions. So when we're asking people, you know, or if we ask the question of our children, you know, how's school today? Right? We always ask, well, how was school today? We maybe have to think of more nuanced questions. And, you know, I want to kind of throw that over to you guys. What are some of the questions that parents can begin to routinely ask so that if something does occur, they've already kind of set up a ritual where there's some communication either before school, after school, who did you eat with today, who is your best friend, because we don't want there to be an instance where there's a crisis and they've really experienced something negative in school and they just don't know how to express it because we never talk about how Islamophobia is impacting us. Right, so they don't know how to share that information. So I'm wondering, you know, what would be some of your recommendations as to how we can begin to set up or carve out a space, you know, in our daily kind of family schedule to allow for those conversations to happen.
You know, Camila, you raised a really important point, and that is really how do you develop the mechanisms for communication? And one of the things that we find in the literature is the stronger communication between parent and child that exists, the more likely the child will share with their parents issues that do come up. And that really actually, what I find is oftentimes parents don't put in the investment early on. And it's never too late, but it makes it easier to start the process when children are young. So when they come home from school, again, on the car ride home, what did you eat? What did you do at recess? Because recess and the time periods where they're not very structured are usually when you see a lot more interaction that's not monitored, and that's where you start seeing some of the bullying take place, or you have a chance to get to see your child's personality. So that's really looking at the unstructured time at school, asking them about what was the best part of the day, what was the worst part of the day, creates opportunities to talk to your child. And often on Facebook we have a number of lists of questions you could ask your kids, because you know, as kids get older, they sometimes, if they're not used to talking on a regular basis, they don't have those rituals where they know that this is the time I'm going to be talking to my parents, they're going to slowly shut down. So really it's important for parents to have certain rituals, set them up early. It could be after school, it could be during dinner, meal times, if you're able to eat dinner together. A lot of times parents may put their kids to sleep by reading a book. Well, that's a really special moment where you can connect with your child and talk about not only the book, but also kind of snuggling and really talking about what's on your mind, what are you thinking about for the next day. So really having those rituals are really important, because as a child gets older, they are going to want to have sometimes conversations one-on-one with you. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, like you said, really modeling behaviors, thought process, frustrations. So if as a parent you've had a frustrating experience at work where you suspect racism may be in place, or Islamophobia may be impacting the treatment that you have, or just anything in general, experiences difficult days, really modeling how you cope as an adult really sets to set kind of a precedent for your kids, because you're modeling, and whatever you do, that is more likely what they're going to absorb, not what you say. You know that old adage, what you children see, follow what you do, not what you say. That's just really important. So if you're able to kind of verbalize the thoughts that you have, the frustrations, and then channel that information, those experiences, such that is productive and proactive, then that would really be helpful.
I don't know if either you, Sadiq, or Hanan have something to add, but I think, you know, some of those kind of brief tips for adults, especially if you're talking about youth who in general may not be as verbal with their parents. Mm-hmm. You know, they're trying to pull back a little, have their own space and privacy, develop their own identities. Mm-hmm. But I think there's still, you know, some value to, even if they don't express it, that you're curious about their day. You're kind of curious, you know, and kind of openly curious, not looking, you know, to pry information. I need to know every detail of your life, but to say, you know, I'm actually curious about what happens to you on a daily basis. Like, it really matters to me that you're happy and that you're satisfied kind of with your school environment, with your peers. And when I think about how many young people watched and, you know, saw the tweets and the Facebook comments about Ahmed, you know, I thought this is great for them to witness. But at the same time, you know, I wondered how many of our young people have experienced something similar, and it did not, you know, kind of make national or international news. So now I think this definitely becomes an opening, kind of, you know, almost like a classical teaching moment where we can have these conversations with, you know, our children. I remember one of the conversations I had with my daughter, she's 12, when she told me that they were talking about current events and social studies, and a classmate asked her, said, "Oh, Layla, isn't your mom a part of ISIS?" And she, you know, she felt like she froze. You know, she was like, I thought the teacher was going to correct her. I thought, you know, she was like, I was just so angry. I didn't know what to say. You know, the teacher, like the adult in the room, didn't do anything. So it wasn't even at that moment so much the content, but helping her through her feelings about it. So I think with the story of Ahmed and his treatment, you know, what we should assume, I think, is that perhaps the majority of our children have experienced something similar. Maybe not as severe as being arrested, but a moment in which they felt marginalized, that they felt that they were being mistreated, but didn't know what to say, didn't know where to, you know, what to do with that emotion, and, you know, some of it, the anger as well.
Yeah. You know, I think it's important that just as parents to realize the power dynamic that exists between an adult and a child, there exists in multiple different types of relationships, you know, a colleague and your boss, but recognize that power differential and how what a teacher says or doesn't say can really impact a child, and purely not based on content, but based on that power dynamic or that power differential that exists between the teacher and the child. I think what we saw in the example of Ahmed was how that power dynamic worked in a very different manner. We saw some of the most influential individuals in America, in the world, basically express, you know, praise for what he did. And so really how that power differential and that dynamic was used in a very positive manner. But to realize that in a lot of these instances of microaggressions, micro-racism, and racism that, you know, children may experience within the school, that oftentimes that power differential is used in a way to really reinforce stereotypes and prejudices. And so to really cultivate that relationship with your child, let them talk to you, ask open-ended questions, how and what, you know, really work on that in order to get your relationship to a point where they can speak openly about these experiences without feeling that you might overreact or embarrass them at school or make it worse than it already is.
I think also making them feel that you're there to listen, and if they feel in their interaction with you as a parent or with you as a youth mentor that you are listening and that you will empower them to help do what they want is really important, because oftentimes they don't have places where they can talk about what's on their mind. Oftentimes as parents, we talk at our kids and not with our kids. So that's another thing. We may have conversations. What's the quality of the conversation? Does the young person have the voice to express what's on their mind? And then as youth mentors as well, can we practice in our programming how young people can react to different situations? Because what happens sometimes is when the situations occur, just like what you said with your daughter, Camila, young people freeze and then they don't know what to do, and only after they realize what's happened, and then they feel like, oh, it's too late. What can I do? It happened, and it was just a second. Oh, I'm making a big deal out of nothing. When in reality, that big deal is something. And if we can help our kids practice, if a situation doesn't arise, how you can handle, who can you talk to, what can you do, you're really equipping them the skills. And the more they practice, the more confident they will feel about raising their concerns and voicing their feelings.
And Hanan, was there just kind of thinking about what are some of the tips that we can provide for parents, but also for young people who encounter, it reminds you of, how do we deal with racial microaggressions? When someone is telling you, oh, you're just overreacting, that didn't really happen, that's not the case, well, that person isn't racist, as if that absolves them of, not treating people in a certain way. So what can young people do, or how can we equip them with skills that'll help, be able to manage their emotion in the moment, but also to know, I think, like you said, Sameera, that it's never too late. If something occurs and it impacts you in a certain way, you still have every right. It doesn't matter if it's a month later. You still have every right to express how that particular incident made you feel, and then be able to know who are the safe people in my environment that I can express this to. So is there anything else that you would, suggest for parents or for young people who are struggling with some of these incidents?
Yeah, so a suggestion I would have for parents is that, sometimes kids just don't feel comfortable talking to the parent. So, finding those mentors in the community to connect them with is very important, because if that way it gives the kids multiple options on, if they don't feel comfortable with talking to the parent, they can go talk to their mentor, or if they don't feel they don't feel comfortable talking to their mentor, there could also be maybe extended family. So connecting the youth with more, with good role models and giving them more options and people to go to, because a youth may click with one person and not the other. So I would say just giving them more options.
So how would you respond to a parent, though, that feels like, well, my children should come to me, and almost feel betrayed if they go to another adult in order to express some of the hurtful feelings that they're trying to cope with? What would your advice be to, to the parent or, the caregiver, if they feel like, well, no, my children should only speak to me about these issues?
I'd probably just remind them that, the kid is going to have different, contexts. Again, whether it's the peer or the community, they have those friends, they have friend groups. So if you stop them from, obtaining the good role models, they're going to find someone else to talk to that, that you don't know about. It's going to happen. So, it's better for you to be aware of the relationships that they have, to be aware of who they're talking to and who they're going to for advice, rather than limiting their options. And of course, we're human, we're not perfect, we don't know everything. So, it is a great help for the parent as well.
And I wanted to just shift slightly, because I'm curious to know, what were the I guess, most surprising about, the research that you found, the data? Because when you put out the infographic and you're talking about the risky behavior that youth are engaging in, I know there was possibly some pushback, saying, no, that's not true. Our young people are not using drugs, they're not having sex, they're not, all these things that they are not doing. But from your report, from the research that you conducted, there were some findings that I'm sure were very surprising, either to you or to just many other people. So I'm just curious to know, what was most surprising for you guys?
I think the lack of gender difference was a big surprise for me. That was one thing that was big for me. And then also the fact that even individuals who identify as being religious or identify with the faith closely, and that it's very important to them, they're also engaging in this behavior. So I think, to me, those are the two things that we need to realize as a community. First of all, that study was looking at a sample that consists of individuals who are both mosque-going as well as not mosque-going. So that's important to realize. A lot of people were concerned that the numbers seemed very high, but the reality is many of these individuals we may not be seeing at the masjid. But even when we look at other studies that we've done looking at individuals who are at the masjid, you still see at least minimum of 10% of young people who are engaging in some of these behaviors. Now, if we talk to individuals, young people who are actually on campus, they're actually telling us that our numbers are very low compared to what they're seeing. So I guess the big thing was, one, the lack of gender difference, and two, the fact that even individuals who identify themselves or indicate their religious activity, religion is important to them, that they're also engaging in these behaviors.
It's interesting because last week a group of us that all went to school down in Urbana-Champaign got together. It's 10 years since I shouldn't age myself, but we were talking about those statistics, and I asked, are you guys surprised? And they all looked around and said, no, sounds about right. I mean, not to name any names, but we had an idea of who was on campus and who was Muslim and who may have identified with the masjid community didn't, but we all kind of nodded our heads and saying, yeah, that seems like the right numbers based on our experiences. So I think a couple things to keep in mind that I want to reemphasize is, when we look at sample sizes, larger sample sizes in other research studies that maybe focus on specific risk behaviors like sexual risk behavior. There was a student a doctoral student in Canada who had a larger sample size, found higher statistics of Muslims engaging in premarital sex. And so to really be cognizant that other studies are coming out that are reinforcing some of the findings that we've found in the study that we released in that first infographic. And also to recognize that this is just preliminary research. The Muslim community is an under-researched community, and inshallah, with time, there's going to be a lot more focus, a lot more funding presented towards really understanding the different types and flavors and behaviors of all Muslim audiences, masjid going and non-masjid going.
And Hanan, what was surprising for you from the research?
So being involved with youth for a while now, I unfortunately want to say that it wasn't that surprising. I think it was surprising when I first found out. That part was, I was shocked, and then I was like, wow, this actually happened, and I had to quickly get over the shock to think, okay, what can I do to prevent this from happening? Like, what can I do as a community member, as a youth mentor? But yeah, unfortunately, very unfortunately, it wasn't very surprising. I actually thought the numbers were going to be higher, to be completely honest with you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. I know that the time goes by so quickly, but what I wanted to give each of you about a minute, I guess, to share kind of what was significant about the research, and for you personally as well as professionally. I mean, Sadiq, like you said, the community is under-researched. We don't have a clear picture of, currently what are the stressors, and then also, I always emphasize this, for every problem we identify, we have to come with a solution. There has to be a recommendation in order to meet that challenge, or else people feel overwhelmed. And then when they feel overwhelmed, they kind of turn away from the information, because they don't know what to do with it, or they just feel incredibly helpless. So I wanted to give each of you a minute before we end, to say what was important for you personally and professionally about the research, and what would you like to see? How would you like to see this develop in the future? To expand on it. So I know a minute is a short time, but if you could kind of respond to that question. Beginning with you, Dr. Sameera.
Sure. I think for me, as someone who's been active in the community for more than 20 years, for me, what I wanted to get out of this paper as well as the research is understanding the nuances of the Muslim community in terms of Muslim youth, because oftentimes I would get frustrated when people would talk about Muslim youth or this, Muslim youth or that. No, my experience and what I've seen on the ground has been that there's a lot of diversity, and that diversity, those nuances that we talked a little bit about in terms of developmental pathway, is impacted by those factors. And so it's very important that, one, that we understand those factors. Secondly, we didn't talk about this that much, but in terms of the subgroups within Muslim youth, such as the issues and challenges facing African American Muslim youth as well as convert youth, those are again another kind of subgroup difference that we need to consider. And it goes back to the realizing that when we think about youth, we need to understand the nuances so that we can better meet their needs. And I think what I've enjoyed the most has been really taking the research that we have and really applying it to the community setting, going out and doing the workshops, and really helping youth mentors, teachers, parents, realizing, okay, we have this information about the research in terms of risk behaviors, but there's something actually we can do about it. It's not kind of doom and gloom. It's, okay, here's this reality, let's do something. Here are the recommendations we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and really being able to present that to the community and giving them tools that then they can really impact and make a difference with their children as well as young people in their environment.
If I can go next, I would say, so, we talk a lot about, the risk and how we can help them and the research that we can do, but I think it's really important to remember that the youth themselves have ideas, and they have, the capabilities of helping with those programs and helping, empower other youth themselves. So really including them in the process instead of feeling like, oh, they don't know yet, or, they need a little bit more time to experience life. I think it's really important to have conversations with them. You'd be very surprised what these kids are thinking. I recently did a workshop with middle school girls, and they were bringing up points that I didn't think about until I was in college. So I think it's really important to include them in the conversation.
I think, one thing I would like to see is inclusivity, really focusing less on what youth aren't doing and really focusing more on what we can do in order to bring in and be more relevant to young people. I think this research has shown me that there's so many challenges, so many different subgroups of Muslim youth, as Sameera mentioned, so many mental health concerns, so many family concerns, so many lack of resource concerns. And so what can we as communities really create, like a wider, more open space where you feel comfortable being part of? And part of that process involves letting go of some of our biases, some of our own judgments, some of our mental barriers, and really accepting youth as they are with the intention of, in the long run, this is going to be better for them.
Okay, great. I just want to remind everybody quickly before we go, please do not let another minute go by without going to the FYI, the Family and Youth Institute website. It's thefyi.org, and that information will be posted. Also, like the Facebook page, sign up for the email list. They send out great articles. I get one every day, and articles about self-harm, about how do you speak to young people, what are some of the issues. I think one was about pornography addiction. I think these are all of the things that we have to begin to really just kind of face head on. It's 2015. Our young people are inundated with so much information. So if we don't speak to them, know that they will Google information and not necessarily find anything that's accurate. So we want to make sure that we have some influence over, especially these formative years, this developmental period, so we can shape them in a way that they are empowered. They know that they come from a community that is, and the culture is inclusive, that is accepting of who they are, so that they can move in the world and feel just a greater sense of agency and of pride and of, strengthen their identity. So inshallah, you've enjoyed this monthly webinar series with the Family Youth Institute. Again, I encourage you to go to the Facebook page and also the website. Contact them if you would like to bring this programming to your community. The workshops are interactive. They're engaging. You can go on YouTube as well and to find some clips to find out a little bit more information about some of the services that are provided. Also go to Muslim Wellness Foundation's Facebook page. We constantly post information there as well. And I think it's important for us to also get feedback about what are some issues or topics or challenges that the community would like us to bring forth, that you would like us to kind of to discuss and to bring more information about, so that this becomes a two-way street, that we want to know what we're doing is relevant, that is resonating, and so that we know that we're also on the right track. We'll also post later email addresses if you would like to contact the authors of the report. Again, I encourage everyone to go and actually read it. I kind of say that jokingly, but since I'm a nerd, I like to read. Everybody doesn't. But there's so much information, again, about how young Muslim women are impacted, convert youth, refugee Muslim youth, and that's kind of an area we didn't really get to touch on tonight, but thinking again about not just the Syrian crisis, but different crises around the world where young people, again, who are being uprooted from their home countries and really facing significant stress. We want to be mindful, again, if we embrace refugee families into our community, are we going to be welcoming? Are we going to embrace them? Are we going to be inclusive? Are we going to be understanding? So these are some of the things that we have to really begin to address in a very holistic and understanding way. So again, I want to thank everyone who is watching. If you have questions after the webinar is over, again, feel free to post them, tweet at us, post on Facebook, but we will welcome you back. Our next webinar for October is going to be around the idea of recognizing the signs of spiritual abuse. And this has come up when we're engaging and talking about scholars who are very influential in our community, or perhaps our local imam. How do we recognize some of the signs that perhaps the religion is being used in an abusive or negative way to influence others, and what can we do to address that as well? So I'm going to sign off. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Camila Rashad, and we definitely welcome your questions. Thank you again to the Family and Youth Institute team. You guys are incredible. I just, alhamdulillah, the work that you're doing is so needed. So, I pray Allah gives you, all of you guys, the patience, the strength, the wisdom, and the stamina, really, for this, because it's definitely needed by the community. So, assalamu alaikum and good night.
Alaikum assalam.